hopefully you had fun and began to be a bit more comfortable with the affective I statements. Again, continue to practice those. It'll become more natural to you the more you try and use those intentionally. This next piece is about, again, if you're in the classroom or in your role and you're addressing maybe some of the lower level behaviors, how we can shift to not only go from a traditional approach, but move to a restorative approach. And this handout has lots of things, right? Some are low-level ones, like talking in class, to bigger ones like fights or harassment. But the concept remains true that there is a traditional consequence and there is a restorative consequence. Now, I think sometimes districts get into trouble or frustration when they neglect the traditional consequence and only go to restorative. And that's where we kind of get into the imbalance of accountability, right? There has to be accountability for students to learn about their mistakes. Now, just giving a kid a suspension or detention is probably not going to teach them the learned behavior and make a sustained change for many kids. But this idea of a blended consequence package is we can use some elements of a traditional consequence with the teaching piece and the empathetic piece of a restorative consequence, and hopefully create more of a learning experience for students. And so my approach includes both, right? If we refer back to that SDW, right, that 4-quadrant social discipline window, we always want to have high accountability, but also offer high support. And that's where we get to that with box, that top upper right-hand quadrant. So look at the handout. Again, there's a wide range of like low-level to high-level misbehaviors. Don't get hung up on that, but just get some ideas, get the juices flowing about how there are other ways that we can address misbehaviors in addition to traditional consequence, or with maybe lessening a consequence. So for example, if there was one about doing graffiti on a desk, right? We could assign a kid a detention for 3 days in a row, or give them in-school suspension. Okay, that might work for a few kids, it might not work for everybody. So in addition to having them serve a detention or suspension, maybe they are in lunch detention for 1 day versus 3, but part of that detention is, with parent permission, they have to clean off the desks in the room, or they have to have a conversation with the custodial staff, at least learning about how that makes their job that much harder, how they have to now get certain chemicals and products and spend time cleaning the desk off when it didn't need to happen, right? And that part of it, in addition to a consequence, maybe a lessened extension or duration of a consequence, can possibly be much more impactful in helping that kid not make that same choice again. So look through that resource, get some ideas of how we can kind of create this blended consequence package. And then your facilitator will share with you 2 different scenarios. And again, in your little groups, you'll talk about how you might respond, right? With an element of a traditional consequence, and where you can bring in that restorative consequence. And again, how you might start in one way, but always hoping to get to the upper right-hand quadrant of the discipline window and being restorative, doing things with the students. So have some fun being creative, working through these 2 scenarios, and we'll catch up for our closing activity in a minute.